The D&D Adventure System is a series of board games based on the popular fantasy role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons. These games offer a cooperative board game experience with that classic dungeon delving flavor. Each core game entry features a large assortment of unpainted miniatures representing heroes, villains, minions, and monsters, along with other components that could find use in the D&D role-playing game. These board games are a great way to expand your miniature collection and a fun challenge for miniature painters. I took up that challenge and painted most of these board games. Now I am going to share some of the results. In this video, I will give a review from the perspective of a dungeon master and mini painter of the miniatures that come with the Legend of Drizzt board game. I will share what I like and do not like about the miniatures and discuss their usefulness within D&D and abroad in the greater world of miniature gaming. I painted all of the miniatures in this video and will touch upon my choices and experience painting them. This will not be a review of the game itself, but rather the components. Stick around until the end for some tips on prepping the miniatures if you plan on painting them yourself. Let's first get an overview of the set. The year 2011 saw the release of 2 core game entries to the D&D Adventure System. Whoa, 2011. These games are a bit old. Do not panic. You could probably find the more recent entries to this series at your local game store, and the rest are still widely available online. Anyway, the Legend of Drizzt board game was the second release of 2011 and the third core game entry to the series. The board game is based around the Legend of Drizzt series of books by R.A. Salvatore and recounts the adventures of the character Drizzt and his many heroic companions. On these quests, a group of heroes travel through dark caverns facing denizens of the deep, drow attacks, assassins, and mercenaries. The miniatures of the game, for the most part, follow subterranean and underdark themes. I would categorize the miniatures as such: heroes and allies, goblins and trolls, servants of Lolth, and miscellaneous. I should mention that I am not familiar with these characters. I used artwork as a reference while painting some of these minis. I painted the rest though, as I saw fit, so some of the characters may look different. Alright, let us begin with the heroes and allies. The Legend of Drizzt does things a little differently than the previous entries. This game features 6 hero miniatures instead of the normal 5, along with an ally mini and 2 additional characters that could be villains or playable characters, depending on the scenario. First up is the guy the game is named after, Drizzt. Or Drizzt. Or maybe Drizzt. Or is it Drizzt? Drizzt? I'm just gonna go with Drizzt. Drizzt Do'Urden, the Drow Ranger, is a fun elven hero miniature. He wields 2 swords. Dual-wielding weapons always looks epic. Another detail I really like is the fluffy fur collar to his cloak. I painted it white like the artwork I've seen. This, along with the bright drow hair, draws attention to the model's face. Drizzt is a drow, also known as a dark elf. I chose to paint all of the drow in this board game with jet black skin, like the few pre-painted drow miniatures I already have. Artwork in 5th edition source books shows Drizzt wearing black armor and a teal or green cloak. I adjusted the color scheme to add a little more color. Firstly, I painted his armor dark brown so that it could be distinguished from his skin. I also swapped the greenish teal cloak for a dark blue, but I used the teal for the cloth hanging about his waist. This gave the core of the mini some color. The pose is heroic. I can just picture him perched atop a cliff surveying the wilderness before him. Now obviously this miniature would be a great tabletop representation of Drizzt, but it could also pass for a drow captain or a player character. Before proceeding to the next hero, it would only be fitting to jump to Drizzt's animal companion. Oh, These names are not getting easier. Guenhwyvar is a magical panther summoned from an onyx figurine. If you look up photos of black panthers, you may notice that their fur almost has this blue luster in certain lighting. I tried to simulate this by painting the mini with a mix of black and dark blue. It came out just like I wanted. I chose to paint the claws and teeth white and the eyes yellow so that they would stand out from the dark fur coat. My favorite part of this miniature is how the panther is posed. Guenhwyvar is lunging with her claws outstretched. Her teeth are bare, ready to choke the life out of her prey. This long form makes the miniature unstable, but it is worth it. I give it 2 thumbs up for this dynamic pose. This will be useful for a player who wants a panther animal companion, or just as a wild animal encounter. This is my favorite animal miniature in my collection so far. Bruenor Battlehammer is a dwarf fighter. This model wears a suit of heavy armor and bears an axe and shield. Let me start by going over the armor, and boy does Bruenor have a lot of it. The armor is intricate and detailed, with the helmet somewhat resembling a crown. The armor seems to impart a sense of wealth, so I decided to color it as such. The combination of shiny metal paint with gold on the details leaves no doubt that this dwarf has an extravagant layer of protection. As for his axe and shield, I think they could be better. The axe blade is a bit close to the hand. The shield has a frothy picture of ale on it. I think this is a little silly, but you know, it plays into that stereotype that dwarves love ale. So, glug glug. I like that this dwarf has an eye patch. It is not very noticeable, but it is a cool little feature. Also, the beard plus the eye patch makes this look like a short Odin. Bruenor will make for a nice high-level dwarf player character. I could see this being used as a fighter of nobility, or a cleric or paladin belonging to a religious order that has grown quite wealthy. Next up is the human barbarian Wulfgar. This is another fun mini. Wulfgar's clothing is a collection of furs and hides, so I colored them with a variety of browns. I like the way the furs are billowing behind him and how his hair looks like it is being blown to the side. This adds a sense of motion to the miniature. I mentioned that the previous model resembles Odin. This mini looks like Thor raising his hammer toward the heavens to call down a lightning bolt. This guy also gives off Conan the Barbarian vibes. I painted him with a warmer suntanned skin tone as a result. The model also feels big compared to other minis. If he didn't have that long flowing hair, I would consider painting his skin light gray like a Goliath. I like the mini for its rugged aesthetic. Wulfgar would be right at home in a savage apocalyptic setting like Dark Sun. Aside from being a barbarian, I could see this model being used to represent a druid. Of course, you could just go all the way with the Thor idea and make him a storm cleric. Here we have Catti-brie, the human archer. It is interesting that this model is titled Archer rather than a standard D&D character class. She wears simple clothing, minimal armor, and has a bow and sword. I was looking through the list of magic items in the Dungeon Master's Guide before painting this mini. I painted the boots light green to look like the boots of elvenkind. She looks like a civilian, so I painted her clothes with simple colors. Blue shirt, brown pants, dark brown cape. I picture her as a farmer who has rushed out to defend the town as a member of the local militia. This would make for a great low-level ranger or rogue. This would also work for representing a lot of NPCs, such as villagers, militia volunteers, or a thief in commoner's attire. This is a very usable addition to a miniature collection. Next up is one of my favorite halfling miniatures so far, Regis the Rogue. Looking over the miniature brought the Guild Artisan artwork from the 5th edition Player's Handbook to mind. I took inspiration from that artwork and decided to paint Regis like a well-off merchant. I gave him a rich red shirt that would surely catch the eye of shoppers in the marketplace. The amulet or pendant also hints at wealth. I carefully painted it gold with a dot of lime green on the stone. Perhaps this is not the kind of rogue that sneaks around and picks your pocket, but rather one that convinces you to entrust your treasures with him. The only thing I do not like about this model is the weapon. The mace probably had to be scaled down to look appropriate for this guy's small stature, but doing so has caused a significant loss of detail. A small sword would have come out better, but I would have taken this mini without a weapon. I like to think this halfling could talk himself out of any conflict. This would be a nice mini for a rogue, but it could also pass for a handful of spellcasters. That mace kind of looks like a scepter or a wand, and the pendant could represent a holy symbol. What a fun, versatile model. There's another dwarf among the heroes, and he is Athrogate, the Battlerager. This is another miniature that does not have a standard character class as part of their title. The Battlerager is a barbarian subclass from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. Such dwarves specialize in wielding spiked armor in battle. Athrogate is covered in some of that spike-studded armor. There are layered plates, large sheets, and pieces that look like they have a molded musculature to them. Most parts of the armor could be painted metallic or brown like leather. I decided to paint most of it like studded leather, with the main, shoulders, and front piece painted a dark metal. Remember when I said dual wielding always looked epic? Well, I changed my mind. I do not like this dwarf's weapons. They just don't look intimidating. They are either too short or the handles are too thick compared to the spiky heads. They just look off. Initially, I did not like this miniature, but weapons aside, this mini is growing on me. The obvious choice for this would be to use it as a dwarf Battlerager, but Athrogate could pass for a dwarf fighter or another rare armored barbarian. These next two characters are villains or allies depending on the scenario. The human assassin Artemis Entreri is a long-time rival of Drizzt, and is equally proficient in dual wielding. He bears a sword in one hand and a dagger in the other. He is lightly armored with a few bits of metal here and there. I painted his clothing a variety of browns so he could blend in with the common crowd of a city. Nothing colorful, nothing flashy. He wears a simple cloak with his hood up. I painted this brown as well since I already have plenty of minis with black or gray cloaks. The pose is a simple depiction of Artemis walking with his weapons drawn. I like this model. It has some cool features to it, like the hood and weapons, but it is not so dramatic that you think it is the hero or villain. This miniature would easily pass for a rogue or ranger, and will make an excellent generic human assassin or bandit. I expect this model to see a lot of time on the tabletop. The last miniature in this category is the Drow mercenary Jarlaxle Baenre. Simply put, he is a dark elf pirate with a fun pirate outfit. I took one look at this miniature and immediately thought this must be an eccentric character. He has this asymmetrically buttoned jacket that appears to tuck into his pants. I decided to paint both his jacket and the pants the same color, which was probably not the ideal choice, but now it looks like some strange uniform. From what I have read, Jarlaxle is an outsider in Drow society, preferring to travel abroad, explore, and wear brightly colored clothing. However, most of the artwork I've seen depicts him wearing black and purple. Maybe purple is considered bright and colorful to the Drow? Jarlaxle also has a wide-brimmed hat with a big feather sticking out of it, and an eye patch. There sure are a lot of eye patches in this board game. This is yet another dual-wielding miniature. Jarlaxle is posed holding a cutlass and a dagger. This pose looks like a freeze frame from a sword fight. I could just picture him parrying sword strikes aboard an airship. This is an excellent pirate miniature. It would be great for a rogue, particularly the swashbuckler subclass in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Personally, I think this guy would look cool with green skin, like some sort of orc or goblinoid. Speaking of goblins, that brings us to our next category, Goblins and Trolls. There are quite a few goblins in this board game. First up, we have some Goblin Cutters. The Goblin Cutter is just a simple, lightly armored goblin that is posed ready to backstab someone with a knife. I have a couple of other goblin miniatures already, but none of them are armed with knives or daggers. I like the model's sinister grin. The head size on these goblins feels pretty close to those of the human miniatures. Sometimes goblins are depicted with small heads that are proportional to their physique. Other times they have big caricature heads. These goblins feel like a compromise that is big enough to show the facial expression without feeling too much like a caricature. I painted them with light green skin and dark brown leather armor. I'm getting a pirate vibe from these minis when looking over their clothing and weapons. I could picture these goblins climbing about a ship's rigging with that knife between their teeth. These goblin cutters are a staple low-level creature with a cool aesthetic. They are a nice addition to a collection. Next up, we have the Goblin Archers. This model has some cool clothing and armor. The clothing looks a little warmer, like it might be hide or fur. The wooden shield on the back looks like a round Viking shield. These two details give me the impression that this depicts a mountain-dwelling goblin. Two other notable details are the bits of plate armor and this tufted hairstyle on top of the archer's head. I already have a pre-painted version of this, but it helps to have more. Sometimes I feel like there's a shortage of ranged weapons among my D&D minis, so I am glad this game comes with 3 of these. Having a bunch of goblins raining arrows down from above while the players hold back a horde will add some tension to the battle. These Goblin Archers are yet another good bread and butter hostile for a Dungeon Master to deploy. All of these goblins need a leader, and the Goblin Champion fills that role. First of all, I like that there is a stronger, more armored goblin as the leader instead of a shaman or a sorcerer. For the most part, goblins are cannon fodder. They are weak but come in numbers. This model bears a chainmail tunic and a hefty axe. I painted the armor a dark metallic color with a little gold on the buckles of these 2 belts. I like to imagine the belt he is wearing across his chest is something like a trophy. He is a Goblin Champion after all. I like how the model is posed for a big overhead swing. This looks like it would be an unstable mini, but it is not. The model is actually well balanced. I would use this as a captain, but it could also be used for a Goblin Barbarian or Lumberjack. The last miniatures in this category are the Feral Trolls. The board game comes with 2 of them. They are your standard Dungeons & Dragons stylized trolls with warts, long noses, and sharp teeth. Some of the official D&D troll miniatures are very slender, but this troll is a little more muscular. The fingers are curled to emphasize those sharp fingernails. The way the hand is halfway clenched allows for a miniature to be positioned so it looks like the troll has picked someone up. A nice little feature for a creative dungeon master. I painted the trolls with a dull earthy green and painted the leather arm straps and fur loincloth drab brown. I like to add a little variation to duplicate miniatures. I painted one troll with black hair like much of the official artwork and the second troll with gray hair. A lot of troll miniatures have thin long hair hanging about their heads, but these trolls have their hair neatly bound up in ponytails. I don't have that many troll miniatures, so I was pleased to see that these were included in the board game. That is all for the trolls and goblins. Next up are the Servants of Lolth. This category consists of drow, spiders, and other servants of the Spider Queen. First up are these spider swarms. Simply put, they are bases covered in a carpet of spiders. They are one of the easiest models to paint. I painted all of them a pale eggshell color, like they are still young and have yet to acquire their full pigmentation. I already have a red pre-painted version that is titled Demon Web Swarm. Swarms of vermin fall into that category of generic useful minis for a DM to own. They are an easy grab-off-the-shelf enemy for a random encounter. They are also a nice supplement to a themed encounter. Maybe your players are fighting giant spiders, but you need to add something else to beef up the encounter. Instead of adding more iggly-biggly spiders, you could back up your Spider Queen with hordes of itsy-bitsy spiders. You could also use these as environmental hazards. They could be passive until someone falls into the pit full of them, or maybe add egg sacs that release spider swarms if they take damage. These spider swarm minis are simple but full of potential. The Drow Duelists are the foot soldiers among the Drow included in this board game. The models depict male Drow in layered armor wielding a thin sword, probably a rapier, and a short sword. Yes, even more dual wielding. I have a pre-painted version of this miniature as well. It is called the Drow Blade Master. Most of the time, the Drow are shown wearing dark armor, probably a black leather or possibly a chitinous plate mail. I decided to paint these duelists a little differently. I painted them to have a mix of metallic plate armor over dark brown leather. The result surely has more contrast than the default Drow color scheme, but I'm not certain I like it more. My favorite detail of these models is the hair. That long elven hair looks great painted white. The duelists could be painted to look like surface-dwelling elves, but the jagged, stylized armor, it just screams dark elf. These would be useful for running adventures in the Underdark or the Demon Web Pits. One of these could also be good for someone looking to play a Drow rogue, fighter, or possibly a ranger. This Drow Wizard is an interesting model. Practitioners of magic are usually pretty high up in these fantasy societies. The default Drow culture in D&D is a matriarchal theocracy. Apparently, it is not uncommon for male Drow to become wizards, and I think this has to do with the emphasis on religion and worship in the society. Divine magic is viewed with great esteem, whereas arcane magic is probably seen as little more than a practical tool. Hence, we have female Drow at the top, claiming positions of power in the religious order, leaving the males to take up arcane magic to serve the matrons. This particular model has a lot of details. He wields what looks like a scepter and bears these tube-shaped objects, which I assume are scroll cases. The clothing, or armor, is layered in a similar fashion to the previous duelists. I painted the skirt blue and the cape gray. The cape looks to be made of some sort of scaly hide. The mini could be a boss battle or just a support spellcaster behind the front line. This would also work to represent any dark elf arcane spellcaster. The next servant of Lolth is the matron mother Yvonnel Baenre. Under the social structure imposed by Lolth, religious officials hold the most power. Yvonnel is the mother of Jarlaxle and the leader of a noble house. She is viewed as being favored by Lolth. The miniature depicts a female Drow adorned with jewelry and with very long hair flowing behind her. She wields a dagger in one hand and a spider in the other. There is a little bit of ambiguity that miniature painters can take advantage of here. You would be forgiven for thinking that she is holding a heart in her right hand. The ceremonial attire, the dagger, and the way the model is holding the spider makes it look like she just cut out someone's heart for a ritual. I painted the spider red to play into this interpretation. I painted most of the jewelry gold, a color that I do not often see on Drow. This will set her apart from the other priestesses on the tabletop. I wanted her to have light colored clothing, but not something that would blend into her hair. I settled on this light brown. This model would serve well as a Drow religious leader, but I do not see that much prospect for this being used as a player character mini. The Yochlol Handmaiden of Lolth is a shape-changing demon. This miniature shows the demon in its ooze form. The official artwork always shows them as yellow, waxy blobs with an eye. While that bright shade of yellow does look quite alien, I wanted to paint this to look a little more unsettling. I started with a fleshy tone and then layered a patchwork of subtle red and blue washes to give it this almost dulled rainbow skin coloration. To make the eyes look more otherworldly, I painted it a solid yellow. The eye looks lifeless yet all-seeing. I also like the way I brushed a little extra red on this tendril. I like to think someone just recently caught a glimpse of the demon in its true form, and the Yochlol tied up the loose end by boring that tendril through the intruder's head. This is one of my favorite miniatures in the board game because of this paint job. The result looks more like some sort of Lovecraftian aberration than a demon. This model could easily see play outside of D&D in an occult mystery or a science fiction horror adventure. The last miniature in this category is the Drider. This is a giant spider with the upper torso of a drow emerging from where the spider's head would be. It is disturbing to say the least. I painted the spire portion brown. I like the large D&D spider miniatures. Spiders come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but the D&D minis often get the shape that I'm looking for. These knobby joints on the legs are creepy. The drow half of this creature bears what looks like a decorated piece of heavy armor. I painted it silver with a touch of gold over the details. From what I read, Driders are punished drow exiled to the outskirts of drow civilization. According to the lore, Driders would probably not have this fancy armor, but it does look cool on them. Sometime down the road, I would like to kit bash a similar creature. Leave a comment down below if you'd like to see that in a future video. Driders can make for interesting enemies or NPCs to encounter in the Underdark. You could also deploy this miniature in a wizard's tower as a cruel magical experiment gone wrong. That is all the minis in this category. Now it is time to move on to the rest. This board game has a focus on the Underdark, so it has to include at least one Mind Flayer miniature. Here we have a Mind Flayer by the name of... oh dear god. Methil El-Viddenvelp? This model depicts an Illithid advisor to Matron Yvonnel Baenre. This is one of the miniatures I was most excited about in this board game because before this, the only miniature of a Mind Flayer that I had was this Lizard Folk Illithid hybrid. I painted the clothing dark green with this central part of the robe metallic like it is a piece of ceremonial armor. I went a little overkill on the silver. Only a few details should really have been metallic. I like the stitchwork details on the cloak. I imagine the depths of the Underdark are a bit lacking in textile resources. I like to think that the Mind Flayers recycle hides and fabric, stitching old pieces together to make new robes. Lastly, I mixed up a dark purple for the creature's skin. This model has a pose that screams, "Well, don't just stand there, after them!" It is a fitting pose for such an oppressive creature. Mind Flayers are a classic D&D foe, but miniatures of them seem to be few and far between. The presence of a Mind Flayer mini in this board game is a big plus. The hunting drakes are some of my favorite enemy models in the board game. They are like little stout dinosaurs. I painted all three of them the same color scheme of bright green scales with crimson on the frills around the head and down the back and tail. The back and sides of the minis have a nice scaly texture that is quite visible after a dark wash. I could picture these living in a shallow cave on the surface, but not really deep underground. A pack of these drakes could make for a good random encounter in a jungle environment. They're also the perfect size to be used as mounts for kobolds. Maybe the next kobold colony your player's raid will have a stable full of these. These drakes might feel out of place given the theme of the set, but they sure are cool. Elementals are another cool type of monster to fight. This board game comes with 3 medium water elementals. Early in the days of building out my D&D miniature collection, I was in search of a full set of elemental miniatures. I settled on an array of 4 medium-sized elemental minis that I felt shared a similar art style. This exact model was one of them. The model is a rippling mass of water shaped with 2 splashing legs that merge and curl into a wave with 2 sloshy arms to the sides. The center of the model has an angry, melty face. The model looks a bit cartoony, I do not like the pre-painted version of this model, but I do like the ones that I painted. These elemental miniatures are made of a transparent blue plastic. I applied a few thin layers of watered down blue and green paint to shift the color to a darker ocean shade. I followed up with a little dark wash on the face details, a white brushing on the feet and the crest of the wave, and finally a gloss varnish to make them look wet. The result is a dark, translucent ocean appearance that looks way better than that solid blue pre-painted model. These are all-round useful minis to have, although 3 of them is probably more than enough for the average dungeon master. The hypnotic spirits have long hair, tattered flowing robes, and maybe a bit of armor. They are posed in a kind of floaty ghost stance. Spooky. I ended up giving them a quick and easy spectral paint job. It is just a shadow blue paint with a dry brushing of white. As an extra detail, I painted the eyes and mouth bright yellow like they are glowing. These models are made of transparent plastic just like the elementals. I wish I experimented a bit more when painting these. It would be cool to see one of them with some of that transparency. Another option would be to give the clothing and maybe the body some more color so it looks like the ghost is either levitating the clothes or possessing a corpse. These are good ghostly minis to have in the collection. They could see play outside of Dungeons & Dragons in a supernatural horror game. So far, every board game in the series has had at least one dragon miniature. The Legend of Drizzt continues that pattern by featuring Shimmergloom, the Shadow Dragon. This is a large-sized, slender dragon mini. The wings are pretty thin and came pressed together by the packaging. I had to reshape them with a little heat upon unboxing. The head and neck also have a streamlined shape. I started browsing the monster manual for inspiration before painting this mini. I decided to paint the scales silver like a silver dragon, but the wings a purple-black like a shadow dragon. I remember having a bit of difficulty painting the wings. The purple I mixed was quite thin because I was trying to keep a bit of the metallic undercoat. I applied it in multiple coats, eventually giving up on trying to maintain a subtle metallic sheen under the purple. Dragon minis are always in high demand. The thing I like about Shimmergloom is how different its body is shaped compared to the usual chromatic dragons. I plan on using it as a silver dragon, but with this paint job it could still easily pass for a shadow dragon. I have saved the biggest model for last. Heir 2 is a power-hungry Baelor, whose path has crossed Drizzt's more than once. As far as usability is concerned, this beast will probably not see play that often unless you play a lot of high-level D&D. I did not buy this board game for the Baelor. I actually have this model already pre-painted and prefer the new WizKids Baelor models over this one, but I did enjoy painting it. I, along with many other mini painters it would seem, decided to change up the color scheme for this model. Instead of painting the demon red, I opted for a very dark brown with a little gray. A couple things I like about this miniature are the faint fur texture covering the body and the rippling musculature. The fur kind of ties in with the face and wings, which remind me of a bat. The arms, legs, and chest are thick and striated, like the muscles are tensing. This is definitely a creature with titanic strength. The pre-painted version has some bronze details. I decided to go for a brighter metal on Heir 2. I mixed a tiny bit of bronze with my gold paint to make this dull brass color. Baelors are known to have lightning swords, but the shape of this sword looks like a flame to me, so that's what I painted it to look like. Painting the fire sword and whip on this miniature was pretty fun, and the flames came out nice. These would also look cool with blue and white or green and yellow flames. That is the great thing about painting these minis. You have options. If you do plan on painting the miniatures of this board game, then make sure you take the following measures to get the strongest paint job. Scrub the plastic with soap and water to clean off any manufacturing residue. Properly cleaning these unpainted miniatures is crucial, as this residue will repel paint. Prime the models before you paint. A layer of primer will help the paint adhere to the model. Lastly, varnish the miniatures after you have finished painting them. A layer of varnish is armor for the paint. I cannot finish without touching upon another component to the board game that could be useful to a dungeon master. This board game comes with a set of interlocking dungeon tiles. This time we have cavern tiles. The ground on these is dusty stone with scattered rocks and mushroom patches. The walls are jagged, uneven, and in some places close in to create narrow choke points. The way the tiles interlock like puzzle pieces allows for the dungeon to be moved with minimal disruption to the setup. In the board game, these tiles are designed to be drawn randomly from a deck, so they could be useful for randomly generating a dungeon or maze. The game also comes with some rubble tiles to denote collapsed tunnels and small tokens with chests on them. If you use dungeon tiles in your games of D&D, then these add bonus value to the set. And that is the Legend of Drizzt board game. The game comes with a bunch of unpainted miniatures. You get an extra large cast of heroes along with quite a few villains. Those characters feel much more fleshed out than the usual assortment in one of these board games, and that is because they are not just random heroes. They are characters drawn from an entire book series. The board game also comes with a lot of goblins and 2 big ugly trolls. These are staples of a dungeon master's arsenal. Drow have a significant presence in this game's variety of miniatures, along with other servants of Lolth. The Wizard and Matron Mother are pretty nice minis, and the Yochlol and Drider are good creepy fun. Lastly, you get a few general purpose creatures such as drakes, ghosts, and a dragon. The dragon is nice, and I'm loving those drakes. If you like minis of drow, goblins, or dual-wielding minis, there were a lot of those. Eye patches or characters with names that will make you scratch your head before reading aloud, well, this game has all of that. The Legend of Drizzt board game presents some value to dungeon masters in the form of its components. Whether you want to expand your miniature collection deeper into the dark depths, or are just looking for a painting challenge, this board game might just be what you are looking for. If you enjoyed the video, then leave a like. If you did not, then tell me why. If you want to see more content, then hastily pay your respects to Lolth before the Drow Priestess cuts your heart out and offers it to the Spider Queen herself. And press the subscribe button while you're at it. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep making and keep playing. Have a good one. Well, don't just stand there. After them!